KPPP-LP Fargo Moorhead 88.1 FM. This is Nemo Cicados, and I hope we're finding you and finding me at KPPP-LP Fargo Moorhead 88.1 FM, where we are adding local queer color to your airwaves. Tune in to listen at 5 p.m. on the first Wednesday of the month for new content with replays at the same time every Wednesday on the radio on 88.1 FM and at our website at kpppfm.com for the podcast. We have live stream Facebook etiquette. Please refer to KPPP-LP Fargo Moorhead's Facebook comment rules. Links are available as a Facebook note on our page and as a PDF. Be a good audience, don't harass the host, technician, moderator, or other audience members, or the moderator will enforce rules and ban you. Links will be dropped into the comments, or just open a new tab in your browser if you can and take a look so you don't get banned from commenting. If you want to comment on the show, or have an interview arranged with me, you can contact us at 701-566-0917, at Nemo Potatoes on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Contact me at kpppfm.com/finding-me, and hit the contact tab or email me at nemo@kpppfm.com. Follow us on Facebook at 88.1 FM Fargo Moorhead, The People's Press Project, and Mexi-Can. Donations to Fargo Moorhead's low-power commercial-free radio station can be made at our website on kpppfm.com/donate, and check out our underwriting opportunities at kpppfm.com/underwriting-opportunities on how you can support the first queer radio program in the Red River Valley. Last month, I wanted to connect the need for representation to children's targeted media, and this is the path I'm going to follow since it's my biggest passion. And I enjoyed making last month's radio program and podcast. So, let's get into part one. First, let's try to understand what queer representation looks like in Slovenian media. Queer representation doesn't make you gay yet here. We are, with a lot of anti-gay propaganda and hurtful words thrown at us, and now it turns out you spot our queerness first, so we owned it and created our group's identities based on that. And to take back and reclaim our own power in the institution we have no choice but to be part of, but not necessarily participate in. So, I'm going to be covering that using my notes on this PDF, which I will be dropping down into our comments. I'm going to be covering the summary and the foreword that I could gather, as well as a little bit of the first chapter. So, this is a PDF by the Media Watch. It's a Media Watch series. Right, okay. So this is Media Representations of Homosexuality, an analysis of print media in Slovenia. And the reason I wanted to share this was because even though it covers print media in Slovenia from 1970 to 2000, I figured it would be a good idea to take a look at it, because if we want to know what's happening to us now as queer folks, we should probably look at our past. You know, history has a tendency of repeating itself, especially if you're not paying attention to it. But because I'm an anthropologist, I have noticed these patterns for a while now, and I like seeing these patterns, especially in the microcosms of queer fandom and nerd spaces. So, we're going to get into, and I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons to the show I was talking about last month, Voltron, and the news about how Takashi Shirogane, the new confirmed gay character of the main cast, was revealed, and how people reacted to that, and the news that swirls around that as well. So, let's go to the summary here of this PDF, and I want to see if those of you who I was able to share this PDF with took a look at it, read it thoroughly, or started reading it, and if not, then you can hear my notes on it. So, I've also released some of these notes on my Patreon, so if you want to see my version of what I was able to break down from these chapters, I mean, a lot of it is like a lot of word for word stuff, but because I'm autistic, I like to break down that information into sections and then subsections so that it's easier to consume, and hopefully when you do read it, it's easier for you to consume as well, because a lot of people don't have the ability or know-how gained from going to college like I did, or the access to do so. But because this is a free PDF, I figured this would be as good as a resource as any to start with. Okay, so there are 5 parts to media representation of homosexuality, and these are the 5 basic categories. The 5 basic categories are stereotyping, medicalization, sexualization, secrecy, and normalization. Stereotyping primarily relies on rigid gender schemas exploited by the media to present gays as effeminate and lesbians as masculine, drawing on the analogy with their social roles, which thus appear as natural rather than socially constructed. 2. Medicalization. The continuation of the psychiatric discourse on same-sex orientation from the end of the 19th century. This is manifested as a search for the causes of homosexuality. The implied questions are, what went wrong, and what led to homosexuality, and then the co-signing of homosexuality to the medical and the psychiatric spheres as a disease or disorder. 3. Sexualization. The third component of media discourse is manifested as a reduction of homosexuality solely to sexuality and sex. So, the sexualization frequently occurs in graphic images. So the author Kuhar uses Barth's model to explain the difference between the connotative and the denotative levels, which you could probably read further into the book. The 4th category is secrecy, which makes homosexuality appear as something concealed related to shame and regret. And finally, normalization. The last component of media representations is characteristic primarily of the late 1990s, when previous images of homosexuals as criminals, psychiatric patients, and the like were surpassed. However, this change in attitude is only apparent since the kind of normalization found in media representations is actually a heterosexual normalization. Media representations of normal homosexuality are representations tailored to the perception of heterosexuals in such a way that they do not threaten their world. Homosexuality is acceptable only when depoliticized. So, the notes that I have on that compare to the Voltron fandom, but I suppose before I get into that, I need to explain to you what fandom is. Let's talk about that, because it gets rather complex unless, you are part of the culture as of within the last 5 years at least, maybe 3. So, we're going to talk about what fandom is, when it comes to queer fandom, and what queer folks seek when they're in fandom, like our experiences reflected in media, shipping, relationships, that's what they are, heterosexual ships versus queer ships, LGBT tropes, if I have enough time, fan fiction and AUs, if I also have time for that, and what happens when you see discourse, which is why I'm bringing up this media representation in print media from Slovenia. And I feel like this is something that I need to cover because it's becoming more prominent these days, or at least more out in the open in the last 3 to 5 years that I've been at least a nerd, but I've been a nerd for much longer than that. I wanted to talk about at least in these days in fandoms when it comes to queerness and the need for representation. But we need to think about intersectionality and the understanding of what fans are and are not entitled to. And we're going to get academic here with this nerd stuff. So, I have notes for this too, unfortunately. And it's just kind of sad that one day I would be using my academic knowledge for nerd spaces when I felt like I shouldn't have to, or I was afraid to. But because of the recent happenings in the past 3 to 5 years, I'm going to be the innovator for that topic, combining academic spaces with nerd spaces. So, our first section here for the queer fandom area, fandom in general, is queer fandom, shipping, fanfics and AUs, heterosexual ships, and queer ships. Who knows if I'll get to the next point. 1. LGBTQ folks like media just like everyone else. Media representations especially. So, the first part that we'd like to get out of that is like maybe a canonical queer character. But most of the time we get that because apparently a queer character is too taboo and, too sexualized. AKA point number, 3? Yes, 3, sexualization. So, which comes next to sexuality. Secondly, is shipping itself, which is the whole part of the sex topic. So in point A that I have here, shipping, I wrote that it sometimes reflects what queer people would like to see on TV and movies when it isn't provided in a romantic light or a positive light, as well as possible reflection of what we seek in relationships ourselves, whether it's queer platonic friendship or just being allowed to exist, as we are, what we've experienced already, and continue to seek. Point B that I have here, the increase in deeper analysis of media, heteronormativity, queer representation, what's problematic and what isn't, and how it's portrayed in ships, whether heterosexual or queer. So when I talk about that, I'm talking about how oftentimes when there is, like, for example, here's something that everyone can understand. If you've watched Disney, you'll get this. So in the past decade or so, a lot of people have talked about how the princesses always get with the man in the first, several minutes of the cartoon. And there's no development, and they're practically strangers, so why would they get together? And that's toxic, da-da-da-da-da. And Disney tried to change that up a little bit with its movie Frozen. So, right, we have Elsa and Anna, the 2 sisters, and Anna hangs out with her friend that she meets up with. And at first, you're supposed to, a lot of people would immediately they're friends. And of course, the first person she met otherwise was the villain that we would find later on. So let me see if I can just pull up the characters because I am losing my memory here. Right. So Elsa and Anna are they're preparing to be part of the royal family in a different way now. Elsa is about to be the queen, and Anna is supposed to be there, supporting as her sister. And Kristoff is going to be Anna's friend, and Hans is supposed to be the love interest that we assume to be there. He is obviously the villain, as we find out later on as an audience. So, Disney tried to twist that up a little bit and change things up so that instead, Anna is, when she first quote-unquote falls in love with Hans, she just decides to, reconsider over time by getting to know Kristoff as a friend, which I think is, understandable. And I think for what it's worth, obviously there can always be changes in the future, and everyone has to take baby steps. And corporations will only go so far out of their usual formulas because they know what works until it doesn't work anymore, in which case, then yes, they will finally be forced to change things up for their the way they market things and the way they sell things. And then sometimes even for queer representation, that can be really hard to figure out because they've never done it before and they don't know how to do it. And the fact that they still have to translate their animated stories as well as get actors in other countries, they're not going to be able to greenlight that queer content however minimal it is, whether it's just one gay character or two gay characters who happen to be in a romantic relationship, then that can get hard, and either that's just going to create some censoring or a complete ban of the movie in that country, which leads to loss in business, and a lot of corporations don't want to mess with that. So that's oftentimes why there's a lot of problems. And even for writers who work on a show, depending on whether or not it's an original story that they wrote themselves or it's a intellectual property that they don't technically own but are allowed to work with in the realm of possibilities that they are given. And so they work with what they have, they try to push a little bit more, and whether they get it or not is not exactly always up to them. And so, which is why I'll get back to the Voltron stuff later. But a lot of time when we talk about heteronormativity, it's expected, as I bring back to the original point, that sometimes men, women could easily just be friends for a while before they start dating, if that's the case. And a lot of healthy relationships start from friendships. A lot, obviously not all. But it's nice to see that rather than, boom, relationship, they're married, in the story. Especially for kids' cartoons. So when it comes to shipping, there's a bit of a culture around that. So let's use Harry Potter for example, because a lot of us have watched Harry Potter. The thing that you gotta know about shipping is that oftentimes you're gonna see this with combining names to indicate preference for a ship, aka the relationship. So ship is short for a relationship. Usually, most of the time, you're talking about in the context of romantic terms. Sometimes it can be platonic, and usually you have to kind of clarify, like, hey, I like this as my bro TP, the one true pairing, but as bros, or like, sibling-like without actually being related and good friends. So, here's an example with Harry Potter. Harry and Hermione is a popular ship because a lot of people agreed and disagreed whether or not they should have been together instead of Hermione and Ron or Harry and Ginny. One of the biggest popular ships at the time, and probably still is actually, is Draco and Harry, or and usually this is noted by an X between their names. So like Harry X Hermione or Draco X Harry. And then sometimes you just combine them into a new word / name, which is, for example, for Draco and Harry, Drarry. Wild. So now people are making new words for what they're trying to note. So in this next part, people try to find themselves in a ship to normalize it and feel comfortable in their own skin. And so I'm talking about Harry Potter in this context because it's where a lot of the major shipping culture comes from, along with stuff like Supernatural, although I haven't watched it. And I tried to watch it, but didn't get into it. But there's a lot of queer fans who consumed that show and did their own thing. But that's a side thing, and I'm going to talk about what I do know. And what I do know is that this can get dicey because oftentimes queer ships will tend to reflect some heteronormative themes with discourse in terms of sex themes. So like top-bottom switch, who is more like the mother or father in a ship, or basically who's the man, who's the woman. Especially if there are, future children by fans. So like at the end of Harry Potter and in the final book, with the Deathly Hallows, Harry and Ginny had their children. Albus Severus and James and Lily, right? And then Draco had his own son, Scorpius. And so one of the popular ships, because we don't know anything about the Potter kids or the Malfoy kid, is that they have open personalities that fans could run around with. So because that's an open book and there wasn't anything much written about them at the time of the book's release, people were on the one hand upset because, it just kind of felt weird for a bunch of kids at the time to go straight to the end, like 15 years later, and then, there's kids, and they continue this pattern of, doing the same thing they always do. But, because some of us don't want kids for whatever reason that may be, or don't have kids but feel bad if they should be expected to have kids in a certain timeline, so on and so forth. But I'm digressing a little bit. At the end of that book, we have those two children, Scorpius and Albus, and it's one of the most popular ships with this open-ended, like, we don't know anything about them or how they feel, except for Albus is written to be nervous about his placement in Hogwarts, where will he be a Slytherin or will he be a Gryffindor? What if he's in neither of these houses? And so Harry tells him, like, oh, you were named after the two greatest headmasters, and I can't really agree with that because of my later analysis as I grew up, re-examining my love for the books, and because as books are and as people are, they are imperfect and they reflect certain things about the writers. But it showed that Albus was somewhat of a self-conscious person, and so people wanted to run with that, with the blank slate that was Scorpius, because I don't think he really had much dialogue other than the fact that Draco introduced him, or it was noted that Draco had his son there. So people shipped them together, and I think oftentimes either Scorpius or it was Albus that was written as the more submissive of personalities, and it kind of went either way. And it was I've watched and read a few I looked at a few art pieces and fan fictions of that myself because people wanted to speculate and imagine what they could. Alright, so with that in mind, hopefully that makes sense to some of you. But we get to our next point here now. Shipping, creative fandoms, taboo, and purity politics. So, it's usually agreed upon to stay away from real-life people ships. So, for example, let's say you know a popular YouTuber, like some people know Dan and who are these guys? I do watch them every now and then. Let me just see who these people are, because I know they exist. Yeah, okay. So, Dan and Phil are YouTubers on the internet, and they do a bunch of stuff, and I've seen their videos before. They're kind of funny, I guess, but I haven't watched them lately because I'm so busy working here. But a lot of people ship them because they have a good friendship, they get along well, and sometimes people write fan fiction or do art of them. And, when I was younger, I didn't see anything wrong with that, but the whole point of shipping, at least with fictional characters, is because they're fake and they have no agency, so it doesn't really matter because they're made up and no one's actually getting hurt. But in the case of real-life people, it's usually frowned upon that you ship real-life people because they actually are individuals with their own thoughts and ideas in their head, and sometimes real-life shipping has hurt friendships. So you could look up Larry, which is, I believe, let me see what this is, because I don't know anything about this, the band. But, okay. So this is one of the biggest articles that came out of this Larry ship, which is the ship between Lewis Tomlin and Harry Styles. So in this article from 17 magazine, Lewis Tomlin, this is the headline of the story. Lewis Tomlin confirms that Larry's shippers ruined his deep friendship with Harry Styles. And they used to be, platonically intimate friends. They kiss each other on the cheek, no big deal. So, whatever. And they are in the One Direction band. Let's see. In this article it says, when One Direction was thrown together as a band on the X Factor back in 2010, it seemed that out of the entire band, Harry Styles and Lewis Tomlin hit it off the most from the very beginning. But over time, fans began to passionately ship Harry and Lewis together as a couple, despite the fact that Lewis had a girlfriend, Eleanor Calder. Even when Lewis and Harry flatly denied dating rumors, fans refused to believe it. See why it's creepy? Insisting that Lewis's girlfriend Eleanor, even his baby Freddie, were just elaborate cover-ups to hide his relationship with Harry. By 2015, fans were lucky if once affectionate friends were caught standing next to each other on the red carpet because there was a very apparent wedge between them. In a recent interview with The Sun, to promote his single Back to You, Lewis acknowledged the deep respect he's always had for Harry. In a band, you're going to get some people who get on really well and some people who get on quite well, Lewis explained. I have forever had a very high level of respect for Harry. He's great in the situation, he's great on stage, he's a great musician, artist. It's just one of those things that happen naturally in a band. But he couldn't deny that the constant rumors about the nature of his relationship with Harry ultimately made their friendship awkward. It kind of happened naturally for me and Harry because a certain amount of the fans drew up this conspiracy, Lewis said with Larry Silenson, Conspiracy Theories. When it first came around, I was with Eleanor and it actually felt a little disrespectful to Eleanor, who is my girlfriend now. I'm so protective over things like that about the people I love. Lewis said the fear that fans would overanalyze every minor interaction between the two stars caused them to stay away from one another. It created this atmosphere between the two of us where everyone was looking into everything we did, Lewis said candidly. It took away the vibe you get off anyone. It made everything, I think, on both fences a little bit more unapproachable. If anything, Lewis thinks it further proves that there was never anything romantic between them. I think it shows that it was never anything real, if I can use that word, he said. But it's a testament to Harry and Lewis's enduring platonic friendship that despite all the awkwardness Larry fans can cause between them, Lewis still has a deep respect and love for Harry, so much that he can't imagine One Direction going on without him. It's something that I can't ever imagine, really, Lewis admitted, when the idea of One Direction going on as a three-piece without Harry came up. I feel like it's got to be for the fans, and not for the three that wanted to get back together. Harry is actually an inspiring person to watch as a businessman, as a musician. He doesn't really lose Harry. Okay, so can we all just agree that Larry was never a romantic thing so that Larry can get back to being adorable platonic bestie cupcakes with One Direction finally does to reunite a band, please? So yeah, sometimes that can make things really awkward and disrespectful to the people involved who actually already have significant others. It's really weird, especially between people that we know are already straight. But it's different if you can obviously, on television, for example, if two characters are interested in one another and you're just kind of like, will they get together or won't they? But that's up to those people because they have agency. And it's weird. So, again, back, I just wanted to pull that example in terms of real life shipping, which is weird. Then there's usually an agreement that when looking at incest and pedophilic ships, without the analysis of the content itself, or writing dark theme fics in a certain way that's digestible despite many people's traumas being experienced differently and therefore cope differently, or there's some obvious common sense that the author, artist, creator does not condone the fictional themes in their content. Most of the time, we have this kind of free-for-all in fandom where we write whatever we want for whatever reason we want, and it doesn't have to be explained. The number one rule is that you tag things accordingly so that people who are triggered by that content can blacklist it, avoid it, don't have to look at it, and they don't get triggered. Common sense, common courtesy. So, then, after that, generally, it's also agreed that everyone minds their own business on who ships what unless people are actually harmed in the process, either by self-destruction or destruction of others such as stalking, harassment, basics of human decency and etiquette in online spaces, or in real life if it gets to that point. Negative behavior mentioned can sometimes come from groups of shippers known as antis because they have a moral belief that what you ship or create content that is wrong, when in fact there may or may not be anything wrong with said content, or hypocrites when they create similar content themselves in different fandom spaces or ships, or they are doing something even worse than that. So, and the final point of that point, this tends to spiral in a pattern of censorship, which I think about critically because I don't think a lot of things should be censored, but they should be, we should be, have some common sense about this. Like, for example, we don't need to hear from alt-right people, so we block them, whatever. And we can listen to people we do like, and we can interact with them, right? So, in this, I noted that this tends to spiral in a pattern. Illegal kinks explored safely in a fictional space where fake characters experience these things without harm to any real individuals. That's one thing that might go. Bad ships, gay ships are then considered immoral by homophobes. Real common but harmless kinks, sexual expression is then wrong, and so those go. The dark themes, common themes, tropes of drama and angst, like the ones that you see every day, like the misunderstanding, the miscommunication of couples, then that's no longer allowed because that's impure. It made it made me feel a certain way that made me uncomfortable, or this is unhealthy, it's toxic. Then we have the destruction of fandom, or it falls apart. So most of the time, I don't think we should like censor things like that, but we should also have an understanding, or at least a discussion of why these themes are the way they are, or why people experience these things at all, and why it comes to those things, like what gets people into those situations, and then how to avoid them. So I think a lot of the time, it's not always going to be an educational thing, but you can get something educational out of it. For example, and this is iconic in fandom, but there was a Zootopia comic with the two main characters, and the topic was on abortion. And the author and illustrator of the comic, and this was hosted on the site DeviantArt, they said that they supported the right to abortion. But the comic and the dialogue of the comic, even though I believe they seemed to be primarily an English speaker, didn't come across that way to be in support of abortion, and it seemed to be, in fact, against it. So it was a mixed bag. It was weird. And so a lot of people made a bunch of memes about it. But I suppose my point was that you can't, censor everything, and we have to like discuss that. And there was a lot of discussion around it about whether it was right or wrong, and because it's on a lot of people's minds for whatever reason. So we just agreed that it was poorly executed because we could only just assume like maybe they just did not know how to communicate this idea that they were for abortion in this comic that said otherwise. So whatever. We just acknowledge it as something somewhat embarrassing to look at. Then let's see. This next point here, when creating fan content, you try not to cross tag, which is when you like put hashtag this, hashtag that, what it covers. So for example, let's say I'm talking about Harry and Ginny as a ship or whatever, and I draw them in a picture, right? And so I tag it Harry Potter, Ginny Weasley, or I tag it Harry x Ginny, so on and so forth, or whatever their ship name is. And then I also tag it Harry Potter as like the overall fandom, or I tag it Hogwarts, like maybe they're at school in the picture. But if I tag it something like Pokemon, that's going to be weird because that's not Pokemon, unless there's Pokemon in it, but there isn't. And then you might, and that would be cross tagging incorrectly. So just tag it what the thing is. This way, if there's someone out there who doesn't like Harry Potter or doesn't like the ship, they can type into their blacklist, I don't like this ship, and then they put it in, and then they don't see it on their dashboard or their timeline. Or they mute it, and then they don't have to see it again on their timeline, whether it's on Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, or Facebook. So this way, they can continue to have their own media experience of a fandom space, and you can experience yours in peace. So that's how you try to keep the peace in terms of consuming and then creating content. Furthermore, it's considered a social faux pas if you end up cross-tagging incorrectly or do it obnoxiously so that it tries to get more attention to that artwork or writing piece in such a way that everyone sees it, even though they don't all want to see it or they don't know what the F it is. Next part here, some people are dumb and they don't know how to blacklist or deliberately search for the thing they don't like, and they will claim in your inbox or in a message or whatever, hey, this was tagged as this and I saw it and I don't like it and I think you're bad, or you should choke or you should kill yourself. And so a lot of time this is just harassment, and if you have your receipts, then you'll know that you tagged your thing correctly or you didn't. And so either you apologize or you're like, I think you're coming to look for trouble. Most of the time, it's people looking for trouble and they want to fight you for whatever reason. That's how the internet is sometimes. So, and I think the final point of fandom, to curate your space to make it as safe as possible, is that especially in queer spaces, when you think about the homophobia and transphobia in fandom, when you're just trying to ship two people who you think might get along well together, two characters, then everyone should mind their own business, happy shipping. So in order to shape your personal experience, stay away from fandom for a while. Focus on that media you're consuming, whether it's Harry Potter, whether it's Pokemon, whether it's Voltron, whether it's effing My Little Pony, whatever. I don't care what you're watching. If it's as long as it's a fictional show, that's generally the idea. But you want to watch that for a while, figure out what you like about that show, which characters you like or don't like, and then focus on what you do like, and then after a while, explore the internet and your social media and see if you can find friends with those similar interests. Then, when you find those people that you click with, then hang out with them, talk to them, and generally stay in your lane and utilize your social media tools. And what that means is if someone gets in your face about what you like, shut them down, mute them, block them out, whatever. Continue on your way. And they can continue on theirs and they don't have to harass you anymore. And so that's my section that's my section on queer fandom, or at least fandom in general, and how you can apply that to the queer fandom space. Now we're going to circle back to the notes that I have here for the media representation of homosexuality and analysis of print media in Slovenia by Roman Kuhar. So, the way I wanted to make this comparison, I never want to make light of social justice topics, media justice, because that's what I study, that's what I do. And because I'm in fandom, I needed to make these connections because we have a lot of issues in fandom that we don't talk about or don't want to talk about or refuse to talk about, so on and so forth, whatever you want to call it, but we need to talk about it now. And the comparison I'm going to make, because I've already talked to you about the summary and the 5 basic things of homosexual coverage in media, I'm going to make the comparisons based on what I've witnessed in the last 2 to 3 years being in the Voltron fandom, because that's what I've been focused on. And it's been really weird, and how eerily close it reflects to the themes of how propaganda works against queer people, especially between our two groups that we're going to have here for the Voltron fandom. So now you know what antis are, you know what shippers are, now you're going to understand this a little bit, at least for the most part. Hopefully, in the last month, you also checked out Voltron, or you checked out Steven Universe. Either way, hopefully it was Voltron, because that's the comparison I'm going to make today. Perhaps next month I will show you my building of a video where I analyze these characters' relationships to one another to let you guys know as viewers whether or not you watch it or not, to understand as my unbiased party, to see if whether I'm right or wrong about this. And you can tell me that in the questions or comments that you have and send me. So, when I talked about media representation of homosexuality, I decided to side note a comment that this will be the media representation of Shiro and Keith shippers, which are characters from Voltron, as a ship, usually known as Sheath, which was a ship named by the voice actor for Josh Keaton. He noted when the show first launched that, hey, I noticed that people are already shipping Shiro and Keith. Might I offer a ship name? Sheath. So people ran with that, and they were overjoyed that the actors were interacting with their fans. And so that was kind of cool. It was nice to feel acknowledged, even though it was also weird because, most fans try to keep that under wraps, and most of the time it's, we're kind of secretive about that, as you will know. And then, because there was a ship war, and that happens. Some people try to disagree or agree with you whether or not a ship is valid or not, but generally it doesn't matter what you ship. You could be shipping a piece of toast with an egg, okay? And just say they taste good together, and that's like the basis of your ship because they're good together. And this is going to be another can of worms because I'll have to get into the terminology of all of this based on my knowledge, even though it feels somewhat imperialistic as an American. But because of the attention that Shiro and Keith shippers got from staff, as well as the art that staff created themselves, confirming that they liked the ship, but not necessarily that it was canon. Like, we got the line, Shiro loves you, baby, and hashtag he's looking at Keith. Or from Bex, that was the first one. There was Josh, then there was Chris Palmer with Shiro loves you, baby, and then there was Bex with Ninja Mullet finds his true love. And then it kept going on and on, where we had all this support for the ship, and it was just like, what's going on? Are they hinting at something, or are they just, having fun with us? Either way, it's great, because we're happy. And people known as the Keith and Lance shippers, that thought that Keith and Lance should be together, decided that they wanted to start a war. And so, they started saying that Shiro and Keith shippers are pedophiles. Shiro and Keith shippers are fujoshis, and fujoshis is a Japanese term meaning rotten woman. But I will get into the history of that later because it tends to get really confusing for people who don't know what that means without removing the original context that it had before it got twisted in the imperialistic way that it did by non-Japanese people, especially people who are not Japanese women themselves. And generally, fujoshis are people that, according to this group, are people that fetishize men loving men, which is the term for gay men who happen to love other gay men, or bisexual men who love other men, etc., etc. Men who love men, right? And while that does happen because men tend to fetishize women loving women in porn, I feel like that's a different case in terms of women consuming male-related relationships. So, that's stereotyping, where we were called, and I happened to ship the ship, Shiro and Keith. We were stereotyped as pedophiles. We were stereotyped as fujoshis, which crosses a line into some transphobia because that assumes that we're all women who ship this and not any gay men, even though the majority of gay and bisexual men who love men, happen to ship this more than women. And someone at Free to Fanfic over on Twitter and Tumblr, they had some margin of error, of course, took some polls, and they found that more queer men happen to like the Shiro and Keith ship more than they like the Keith and Lance ship. And then the anti-side would then accuse our side of saying, why do SK shippers, Shiro and Keith shippers, ship Shiro and Keith? Are they sick? It's sick that they relate to the You're My Brother line. This is a line that comes up in season 2. And nobody has relationships that go from familial to romantic and between non-blood related peers. And sometimes incest can be between friends. These are all things that they've said. I know, it sounds crazy. And that would be medicalization, where they try to assume that this is some sort of disorder or disease that we have because we view this relationship the way it is, even though it's one of the most healthy friendships out there that we know of specifically, even if it's never shown in canon that they are romantically involved. We just know that they get along super well. Finally, well, not finally, but my third point was sexualization, if you remember. That side tends to put on us, like, why does Shiro and Keith have so much not safe for work related imagery or fiction? And the truth is, a lot of writers and artists actually don't have a lot of not safe for work imagery or writing at all, because most of the time we focus on the friendship that they do have from when Keith was 15 years old, when he met Shiro at the Garrison, which is the institution they got into together. Not at the same time, but one recruited the other. And sometimes people draw them holding hands or hugging each other because that's what they do a lot. And that's a lot of what the content is. Like, there's hardly any sexual content. Not to say that there isn't at all, but it's just really balanced the way it is. And then, so there's the sexualization of that. And then next here we have the secrecy. So at some point the discourse that we're getting to here increased so badly that the people who were shipping Shiro and Keith went into the dark parts of fandom, or they retreated. And a lot of people who shipped Shiro and Keith did so in secret and pretended or more prominently shipped the acceptable ship, Keith and Lance. Or just stopped going to Voltron at all as a fandom because of the propaganda that was growing from within. And now that we have seen season 6, season 7 now, it's been a long ride. It's been 2 to 3 years, and I'm really tired. And I'm a little bit, I have been disassociating as I've been writing these notes and making comparisons, trying to be sensitive because I'm a queer person myself. I'm a queer person of color, and I'm a queer trans man who is autistic. So I have my disabilities. I have scoliosis, so I'm also physically disabled. So I try to be really sensitive about this, but I'm going to be that guy that innovates these thoughts of academia and fandom, especially queer fandom, and the intersectionality. The 5th point, normalization. We're getting to the end of Voltron as a series, and lately, because of the realization post-season 6 that Shiro is a gay man, according to creators, then articles would come out later. Is it time to ship Shiro and Keith? Is it, is it more acceptable now? And there's all this canon content to work with that suggests, because it's also been correlated, compared to, and mirrored to other canonical romantic coded relationships between male and female characters. So what I wrote here was that it becomes more acceptable to ship Shiro and Keith, including based on canon content. Support outside the fandom that confirms fan suspicions that there is more to Shiro and Keith's relationship that meets the eye and matches up with common heterosexual romantic writing tropes. So then we get to the author's conclusions. I'm gonna now that's a summary, and now I've made my comparison of the two. Please go watch Voltron if you can. There's 7 seasons out right now. It can be either really hard or really easy to get into. Season 1 will probably be the hardest to get through, but after that, it only gets better and better. And if you watch the former Voltron, it's infinitely better than the older versions. If you watch Robotech, I recommend it. If you watch Gundam, maybe. I don't know. But, because I didn't watch Gundam very much. But I did watch Robotech. I saw the big robot, and that's what got me into it, including the character Keith. But I digress. So we're going to go back to this media representation of homosexuality. And I'm going to skip here to the author's conclusions now. So Kuhar says here, media reporting on homosexuality was generally sympathetic or neutral. This general positive trend within representations contains ingredients that enable the perpetuation of negative attitudes of the public opinion towards this phenomenon in the period of 1970 to 2000. B, the above 5 most frequent components of media representation are responsible for the gap between politically correct media representations and negative public opinion. Now you get it. C, Homosexuality still causes uncertainty and uneasiness, so the media usually resort to highly stereotyped images which easily tally with the reader's representations of homosexuality without upsetting them. And now we go to the foreword. The Peace Institute was conducting a broadly based research project on the social aspects of gay and lesbian life in Slovenia. The author spoke to gays and lesbians in an extensive questionnaire. 1. The formal portion of this questionnaire was followed by a deeper conversations of personal experiences of their identities between stigmatized through teenage years or insults. So like the F word or the Q word, if that's what you were called. Some people are not comfortable with it, and that's okay. Or just the D word, so on and so forth. And so the author notes that we are socialized into accepting a broad range of stereotyped and vulgarized representations about F words without ever knowing or meeting one. Funny how that works. Since those born in 1970s or earlier could not have learned anything about homosexuality at school, not to mention obtaining information that could contribute towards destigmatization of same-sex orientation, insults were the only form of socialization available to them. One anecdote that the author mentions is the following, quote, "One of my interviewees told me that it took him a long time to realize what F actually meant, although he was aware of the negative connotations because his parents always shouted, 'damned F,' whenever some politician they disliked appeared on TV. That amounts to nearly everything he learned about homosexuality from his parents." And this is a lot of the experience of queer folks. And this is sort of a digression, but when it comes to like the Shiro and Keith ship, when the brother line was introduced in season 2, episode 8, I've watched the episode many times, so I've remembered. It's one of my favorite episodes after season 6, episode 5, where Keith told Shiro, "You're like a brother to me," and a lot of queer folks have used this line with other people that they happen to be vaguely romantically interested in or didn't know they were romantically interested in order to not ruin that friendship with that person. And so that was something that we could all relate to at the time, even though we didn't really know we were queer. And so I think that's the connection I want to make on that. I'm going to try to cover chapter 1 a little bit to give you a preview of what we're going to be looking at in terms of chapter 1 discourse. And then I will cover it more in comparison to Voltron. This way it'll give you time to actually look at the show between now and next month in, let's see, this month is September, October. So that'll give you time to watch some of that. And hopefully if you happen to finish all the seasons that are available, then you'll be ready to see the final season that comes up in season 8, the final season in November, which we do not currently know because I'm recording this in August. We don't currently know the date of when season 8 releases. We just know it releases in November. Some terms I want you to know to get into from this chapter. Foucault used to have a definition for discourse, which was a set of statements focusing on a specific topic. And in this particular book, it's mentioned that Foucault's renewed definition of discourse is controlled group of statements operating by a specific internal rules and mechanisms inherent to that discourse. So you can apply these rules to any part of fandom. Discourse combines statements that have meaning, power, and specific effects in social contexts, like how antis use the word pedophile as a blanket statement, even though two characters may in fact already be adults at the time that they may or may not be romantically involved, or even hypothetically. And power in this context, Foucault speaks about the circular, dispersed model of power and its productive and repressive role, and thus transcends the understanding of a power as only repressive. Foucault argues that resistance is embedded in the idea of power itself. The place of power is empty. It cannot be appropriated, since it is invariably relational, which means that, in the context of fandom, anti-shippers cannot have power unless it's related to somebody else. So when they find a ship they don't like, that's how they get their power, even though it's empty. And without shippers responding to that negativity, without them getting involved, then they have nothing to work with, and then you can't. They burn out or whatever, and they have nothing but themselves to work with. So I definitely recommend that when you're curating your fandom space and you get somebody in your inbox like, you're evil for doing this, that, and the other thing, and it's just like, get out of my inbox, goodbye, block, So it's relational, and it depends on whether you participate in it. If you can willingly omit yourself from that conversation, that is. Obviously, in real life, I understand that that may not always be the case. So, or you're already deeply embedded in it for some reason or another. But then, if so, I hope you can get out soon, because you're probably slowly, steadily getting brainwashed, or something worse. At the same time, a discourse does not simply translate the systematic domination into language, but it is precisely the discourse because of which and for which these battles are fought. Okay, we're almost done here. I have so many more notes here. So the characteristics of discourse is exclusion and inclusion. Funny. So, I will get to these more detailed subpoints later, but I will cover the first points. So, in terms of exclusion, a discourse related to power, which I've already defined for you in this case, becomes constituted and organized through exclusion, implying also the naturalization of the stated. The things that can be talked about appear as given and natural, but their naturalness is a result of the exclusion of that which is virtually unutterable. Within a discourse, the process of exclusion takes on the form of defining what can be said, what one is allowed to think about, and what counts as knowledge. In this analogy that we're working with in terms of applying discourse theory to fandom, the Keith and Lance ship would be considered the natural ship to go with. And in this, within this discourse, what you can say about Keith and Lance is that it's the pure ship. It's the good ship. It's the best ship. It's better than Shiro and Keith. What can you think about Shiro and Keith? What can you think about Keith and Lance? Exactly. And what counts as knowledge? Hopefully you're making the connection. Hopefully I'm not talking out of line. And since discourse defines and produces subjects of our knowledge, is exclusive or inclusive by definition, then there is perceived institutional power, which is the info deemed the truth, even though it might actually be propaganda. So in Slovenia, the example that they had was that doctors would say that homosexuality is a disease and it's a disorder, or psychiatrists, right? And then, of course, because these are doctors, they have institutional power. And then it's like, oh, well, then they must be right. Even to the people who may be queer, but they don't know what to do with that. So then there's a bias towards the minority without power that agrees with the institution, connects that power, and it's also taken as truth despite the variations of people's lived experiences. And if an individual group has no position of power, like you're just some nobody, no position of power or something similar, these statements do not have the same effect because of the lack of privilege, lack of supposed morality. So whenever Shiro and Keith strippers try to defend themselves, it means nothing. But if there's someone who, like for example, this is something that happens a lot. But like I mentioned, a lot of queer men tend to like the Shiro and Keith ship. But if there's that one queer man that dislikes the Shiro and Keith ship because they ship Keith and Lance, then the Keith and Lance people are going to agree with that man and not the Shiro and Keith shippers. Even though there's obviously different experiences out there. So, I will get more into detail next month, but the conclusion of these notes for this chapter, at least Foucault's conclusion, is a discourse can be seen as a practice shapes or constitutes a subject to which a specific discourse refers and at the same time positions it. 1. A subject is thus produced within a discourse and does not exist outside of it, since a subject must be subordinated to the rules and conventions of a discourse, power relations, and knowledge. In simplified terms, we are what we are said to be, and what we are written about, or what a specific social group to which we belong to is said to be or is written about. In this case, Shiro and Keith shippers are evil pedophiles, fujoshis, moms not taking care of their kids, fighting teens on the internet, and sick. Meaning that the discourse also has the power to define the position of the individual and the group within society. The discourse can thus be understood as language in action. Only through language can one see things and ascribe meaning to them. And yes, there is in fact a language in the fandom. For example, Shiro and Keith shippers tend to be known as Shaladin, which is the term for Shiro and Paladin ships, or Shally, which is short for that, or Piladin, which is not shipping the character Pidge with any of the Paladins, because she is roughly 15 to 16. Shipping Palator, which is any of the Paladins with the character Lotor. Clancers, which are the group of people who generally ship Keith and Lance. Or Clanties, people who happen to ship Keith and Lance but are also Antis, which is generally the majority of Keith and Lance people. Sheaths, which is generally more as a weird plural for Shiro and Keith shippers. And Sheathers, same thing. Or Sheaths, which is Sheefs. Or Kaladin, which is not shipping any of the Paladins with Keith now that he's technically 21, possibly 22 years old. Maybe 20. But he's definitely an adult and has been since the beginning of the show as an audience that we viewed it. I will get more into this discourse next month. I hope you enjoyed this program. Thank you for watching. Did you find yourself today while finding me? Feel free to send me a message. You can contact us at 701-566-0917, at Nemo Potatoes on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Contact me through my contact on kpppfm.com/finding-me on that tab, or email me at nemo@kpppfm.com. If you'd like a sneak peek to the building of Finding Me programs in the future, consider becoming a patron at my Patreon at patreon.com/anemonefish. Follow us on Facebook at 88.1 FM Fargo Moorhead, the People's Press Project, and Mexi-Can. Donations to Fargo Moorhead's newest low-power commercial-free radio station can be made at our website on kpppfm.com/donate, and check out our underwriting opportunities at kpppfm.com/underwriting-opportunities on how you can support the first queer radio program in the Red River Valley. Thanks for tuning in. See you next month on the first Wednesday here on Finding Me.